Virgo, the reason why your family members turn against you. There's a scene that repeats itself in almost every family with a Virgo in it, and almost no one knows what happens in it. It's dinner that suddenly becomes tense. It's the harmless comment that melts in the room. It's you entering a room and feeling the atmosphere change before you even open your mouth. And the explanation everyone uses is always the same. You're difficult, too critical, you exaggerate, you don't let anything go. But that explanation never quite matches what you feel inside, does it? Because deep down, you don't feel like someone who attacks. You feel like someone who sees. And there's a huge difference between those two things, a difference your family never bothered to explain to you, because explaining it would mean admitting what's really at stake. The uncomfortable truth is this: families aren't just made of love, they're made of silent agreements. Agreements about what can be said and what needs to stay buried. About who can make mistakes and who needs to bear the burden of keeping everything running. And at some point, without anyone signing anything, you were assigned a specific role within that system. Not the role of the favorite, not the problem. A stranger, lonelier role. That of the one who sees too much. From an early age, you notice things that others preferred not to notice. The changing tone of voice, the promise that wouldn't be kept, the small lie that supported the bigger one. You didn't choose to be this way. You simply couldn't turn off that radar, because it was, and still is, your survival mechanism, the way you found to protect yourself from an environment that wasn't always safe to feel. The problem is that in a family system there's an invisible rule. The stability of the group matters more than the truth of any individual within it. And when someone insists on naming what's wrong, even delicately, that person becomes a threat to the illusion that keeps everyone comfortable. There's a name for this: homeostasis. Every group that lives together long enough develops a balance even when sick. And any system, when it feels this balance threatened, reacts. Not because the people within it are bad, but because keeping things as they are is less frightening than facing what needs to change. This is where your Virgo nature comes into play. Even though you didn't choose this role, you have a rare nose for inconsistency, for hypocrisy disguised as politeness, for promises made just to appease the moment, without any intention of keeping them. Every time you name this, even choosing your words carefully, you break the script that sustains the artificial peace of the family. You become the mirror that nobody asked to look into. And mirrors are unsettling. Mirrors don't lie. They show what people have spent years training themselves not to see in themselves. So, instead of being grateful for the clarity, they do what every threatened system does. They isolate the source of the discomfort. They rewrite history. They transform those who see into those who exaggerate, who feel too much, who don't know how to let go. And the cruelest thing is that often this doesn't stem from conscious malice. It stems from fear. A fear so ancient that almost no one remembers its origin, only knowing that it hurts to look directly at it. You never wanted to bring anyone down. You just wanted things to make sense. But there's a difference between asking for clarity and being met with the feeling that you're asking for war. That's exactly where the question you've asked yourself alone, in the middle of the night, without the courage to say it out loud to anyone, comes in. Why, every time I try to be honest, do I end up being the villain? You just felt that, didn't you? That question that keeps swirling around unanswered. Why has being honest become synonymous with being guilty? And perhaps the most painful part isn't even the rejection itself. It's not understanding why it happens, carrying that guilt without ever being sure if the problem is you or the entire system around you. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book. The divine wisdom that guides your zodiac sign to a purposeful life doesn't talk about family in a generic way. It talks about the invisible roles that each sign assumes within the groups they are born into, and about how Virgo carries this function of naming what others prefer not to see. It's not a prediction manual. It's an invitation to do what you already do instinctively. Go deep, don't stop at the surface, understand the mechanism behind the symptom. While you only see the behavior of your family, you remain trapped in judgment. When you understand the system, you regain your own peace. You are here now, still experiencing this discomfort, recognizing scenes within yourself that you may never have named aloud. And this is the right time to act, not in a week, when the clarity of now has already dissolved into routine. The link is in the first pinned comment, but be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. Tell me in the comments. When was the last time you said a simple truth and felt the whole room change temperature? Think about how a maintenance technician is treated in a company. He's called when something breaks. He's praised when he fixes things quickly and quietly. But the day he points out that the problem is structural, that the defect will return because the entire foundation is wrong, something changes in the way they look at him. Suddenly he's gone from being useful to being a nuisance. He did nothing more than the job he always did. Only this time, the truth he brought came at too high a cost to be accepted. This is exactly what happens to you within your family, except instead of machines, what you fix are narratives. You're the one who remembers what was promised and not delivered, who notices the inconsistency between what is said and what is done, who senses the discomfort in the air before any word is spoken. And for a long time, this was valued. You were the reliable son, the brother who solved everything, the person everyone sought out when they needed clarity, until the day your clarity pointed inward towards the system itself and no longer outward. Notice something curious. While your perception was focused outward, solving someone's work problem, mediating a fight between other people, pointing out the flaw in a product, a plan, a decision that wasn't yours, everyone applauded. No one questioned your gift. No one said you saw too much. The discomfort only arises the moment that same gaze turns inward, towards your own family structure. Then, suddenly, virtue becomes a flaw. Gift becomes a crime. And that in itself should be a sign that the problem was never your ability to see. There's a word for this in systemic therapy: the functional scapegoat. It's not always the weakest member of the family who carries this role. Sometimes it's precisely the most perceptive one, because the family needs someone to point the finger at when things get tense. And it's much easier to point the finger at whoever exaggerates than to admit that the problem is collective. You've become, without choosing to, the place where the tension of the entire system is discharged. Imagine a pressure cooker with a valve. The valve doesn't create the pressure inside. It's just the point where that pressure escapes, in a visible, noisy, and bothersome way for those nearby. If you were to plug the valve, the pressure wouldn't disappear. It would just explode somewhere else, in a much worse way. But nobody blames the valve for the pressure that existed before it. They blame it because that's where the noise appears, and that's exactly your place within the family system. You don't create the tension that exists between people. You're just the point where it finally becomes visible, audible, impossible to ignore. And here lies a cruel contradiction. The more you try to help by pointing out what's wrong, the more you are pushed out of the family's emotional center. Not because you are wrong, but because in a system that prefers to maintain the illusion, truly helping means breaking the script that everyone agreed to follow, even without realizing it. And nobody easily forgives those who break the script. Perhaps you've wondered why it seems there's a version of you your family prefers, and a real version that bothers them. The preferred version is the one that stays quiet, that absorbs, that doesn't question. The real version is who you truly are. Someone who can't pretend not to have seen what they saw. And the distance you feel isn't because you're too difficult. It's because, on a certain level, you refuse to participate in the charade. And perhaps the hardest thing to accept is this: The closer you get to the truth, the further away others seem to become. Not because the truth is cruel, but because, for most people within a sick system, it's easier to lose proximity to those who see than to lose the illusion that sustains their own identity. There's a specific moment when this usually explodes, when you, without yelling, without drama, simply name a pattern that has been repeating itself for years. A passive-aggressive comment that has become tradition, an injustice in the way affection and attention are distributed among siblings, a rule that has always existed but never made sense, and that you finally ask why. And the answer you receive is rarely an explanation. Most of the time it's silence, or worse, it's you being repositioned as the problem in the conversation you yourself started. This moment hurts in a particular way because it's not simple rejection. It's the feeling of being erased in real time while still speaking. You see people exchanging glances. You see someone changing the subject too quickly. You see the atmosphere in the room closing like a door. And you understand right there, without anyone needing to say it aloud, this truth is not welcome here, even if it is true. There's a scene that often repeats itself almost identically in families like this. Someone asks something directly, without aggression, just curious, just tired of pretending not to notice. And instead of an answer, what comes back is a question in return, disguised as a defense. Why do you always need to bring this up? As if noticing were the crime and not what was noticed. Over time, this dynamic teaches a dangerous lesson, that it's safer to keep what you see to yourself than to risk naming it aloud. What nobody told you is that this collective shutdown has a name and a function. It protects the system from having to change. And as long as you don't understand this mechanism from the inside, you will continue to interpret every silence as a failure of yours, when in reality, it is the system defending itself from the mirror that you represent. This is exactly the kind of mechanism that the divine wisdom that guides your zodiac sign to a purposeful life helps you to see clearly and explicitly, because understanding why the truth is so uncomfortable is the first step to stop feeling guilty for saying it. The last copies are running out, and this type of reading tends to go out of print without warning. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey toward the clarity and genius you deserve. And there's a question that gnaws at you silently, one you may never have said aloud to anyone. Am I the problem? If I simply stopped noticing, stopped commenting, stopped asking, would everything go back to being easy between us? And the honest answer, however uncomfortable it may be, is yes. Everything would be easier. But easy isn't the same thing as true. And a part of you has always known that. There's a price to pay for maintaining the artificial peace of a group, and that price is usually paid by whoever falls silent first. If you were to remain silent, the tension would decrease. Family gatherings would flow without that collective knot in the stomach. But the cost would be you disappearing from yourself, piece by piece, until you become an edited version, more palatable, more comfortable for others, and stranger to yourself in the mirror. Imagine a tree that's been pruned too much year after year, always a little more, always to fit into a flower bed that's too small for its true size. It still grows, still produces leaves, still seems alive to someone rushing by. But anyone who understands plants knows how to recognize a tree that was shaped to fit instead of being shaped to fully flourish. And the saddest part is that from being pruned so much, it may even forget that it once had the right to grow in its own shape. And here's the cruelest paradox of all. The more you erase yourself to be accepted, the less recognizable you become, even to yourself. And ironically, it's precisely this erased version that the family begins to prefer, further reinforcing the message that your real self was never welcome there. It is this type of pattern, the invisible cost of shrinking to fit in, that the book, The Divine Wisdom That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Purposeful Life, helps to dismantle piece by piece, because recognizing the price you've been paying is the first step to stopping paying it without realizing it. Access to this material will not be available forever. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey toward the clarity and genius you deserve. But there's a twist to this story that nobody told you, and it's the part that changes everything. The fact that you're positioned as the problem doesn't mean you are the problem. It means you're the part of the system that refuses to pretend. And sick systems need someone to pretend in order to continue functioning the way they always have. When you refuse, you're not breaking up the family. You're refusing to be the invisible support of a structure that was never healthy to begin with. This doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It hurts a lot to be treated as excessive within your own family. But there's a difference between the pain of being rejected for being too much and the pain of realizing that maybe you were never the excess, but rather the only one there, willing to confront what others preferred to sweep under the rug. You think of a smoke detector. It doesn't cause the fire. It's just the first to react when something is already burning somewhere in the house. And there's always the temptation, in the middle of the night, to remove the battery just to make the noise stop, as if silencing the alarm would solve the fire that continues to spread silently. For a long time, you were treated as the annoying noise, when in reality you were just the first to smell the smoke that others didn't yet want to admit existed. And when that penny drops, something loosens inside you. It's no longer about fixing the family, about making them finally see you the right way. It's about stopping measuring your worth by their reaction to your honesty. It's about understanding that seeing too much was never your flaw. It was always your gift, just installed in the wrong place, tested by people who weren't ready to receive it. Recognizing this mechanism is exactly the kind of turning point that the divine wisdom that guides your zodiac sign towards a purposeful life proposes. Transforming what seemed like a flaw into direction, what seemed like excess into depth. This understanding doesn't stay hidden forever, and those who grasp it early on get ahead. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey toward the clarity and genius you deserve. There's a scene you may not have experienced yet, but one day you will, the moment you stop waiting for your family to change their perspective and see you properly, and simply begin to see yourself that way, alone, without asking permission. It's not an act of rebellion, it's an act of return. Going back inside yourself after years of trying to fit into a mold that was never made for you. You weren't born to be anyone's problem. You were born with a kind of vision that most people spend their entire lives avoiding developing, because seeing deeply is costly. It costs approval. It costs the comfortable illusion that everything is all right when it's not. Your family most of the time doesn't reject you because you're bad. They reject you because you remind them of what they haven't yet had the courage to face in themselves. Imagine a dark room where everyone has learned to walk without tripping, memorizing their way by the furniture, avoiding difficult corners without ever needing to turn on the light. Then someone comes along and turns it on. Suddenly, all the effort the others made to get used to the dark seems wasted, and the first reaction almost always is not gratitude. It's irritation with whoever brought the light. Not because the light is bad, but because it exposes how much energy was spent pretending that it was possible to live well in the dark. And perhaps the peace you seek has never been outside, in the approval of others. Perhaps it has always been right here, in the moment when you finally stop apologizing for seeing what you see and begin to treat this ability not as a flaw to be hidden, but as the most honest compass you have. There's a quiet beauty in being the person who doesn't pretend. It doesn't show up in smiling family photos. It isn't celebrated on special occasions, but it's the only thing capable of leading you to genuine relationships, the kind that don't crumble at the first test of honesty. And when you finally understand that, something inside you stops hurting the way it did before. Not because the wound disappears, but because it finally makes sense. Over time, you learn the difference between belonging and shrinking. True belonging should never require you to erase the most honest part of yourself. And every time a bond only holds while you pretend not to see, that bond was already saying, even without words, that there was no real space there for who you are. This hurts, but it also liberates, because it stops being about convincing others and becomes about stopping betraying yourself. Perhaps you were never the reason for the distance. Perhaps you were, all this time, the only one who was close enough to the truth to scare away those who preferred to stay away from it.